There are two debates that constantly rage among Mega Man X fans. The debates for the best and worst games in the series. Now, the title of best game seems to mostly switch between X1 and X4, depending on who you ask. And really, both are spectacular games. I've even flip-flopped here before, though currently X1 is my personal favorite. The more interesting debate to me is the one on the worst in the series. This is usually between X6 and X7, two games that are both definitely terrible, but I'd argue for two completely different sets of reasons. I've talked about my thoughts on X6 on YouTube before, in a video I did with that Trav guy back in 2019. I called the video Mega Man X6 is a terrible game that I love, and yeah, that thought still holds true today. It's definitely a bit of a guilty pleasure for me. X7 though is definitely worse in my opinion. So today on this Mega May episode of Retrospective, I want to not only go over my personal history with Mega Man X7 and compare and contrast it with X6, but also look at it on its own merits, or lack thereof. I want to explain why I find it to be the worst Mega Man X game. First released in 2003, X7 came out at an odd point in the Mega Man X series. The previous title, Mega Man X6, wasn't even supposed to be made originally. Then Mega Man series head Keiji Inafune had intended for Mega Man X5 to be the final game in the X series, with the style of gameplay that made the X game so popular being evolved and brought over to the Game Boy Advance afterwards in the Mega Man Zero series. However, though X5 was only a moderate success and work on the first Zero game had already begun by the time X5 was out in Japan, Capcom higher-ups still decided to go behind Inafune's back and have work begin on another PS1 Mega Man game, with that being Mega Man X6. Not even a year after X5 came out, Mega Man X6 was released. This was in November 2001, by the way, nearly a year after the PlayStation 2 came out. And the reception was mixed too. Despite using the same game engine as X4 and X5, the stage designs and some of the new mechanics were pretty hit or miss to say the least. Clearly the folks at Capcom felt things needed to be changed up a bit for the next entry. So imagine Mega Man fans' surprise in 2003 when Mega Man X7 hit store shelves, and it was a Mega Man X game that ditched the traditional 2D side-scrolling action for 3D-based shenanigans. Keiji Inafune was once again barely involved, and the game focused less so on series staple heroes X and Zero, and more so on newcomer Axel. And fans and critics alike hated it. I didn't first play X7 until around 2009 or so. I had a PS3 but didn't know if it was one of the models that could play PS2 games or not. But the GameStop near my house at the time was clearing out PS2 stuff, and I found copies of both X7 and X8 for only $5 each. Disc only, unfortunately, but being the huge Mega Man fan I was, I just had to snag them. Indeed, I still have those discs today. Now, my PS3 unfortunately couldn't play PS2 games, but I went back to that same GameStop and got a PS2 Slim on clearance for I think it was like 20 bucks or something, so it all worked out. I actually really enjoyed X7 the first time I played it. I mean, I was a preteen, so I probably wasn't playing with as much of a critical eye as I have now. I was also most definitely probably just excited to have a new game for a to me then new console as well, but there was a sense of wonder for me there. X7, presentation-wise at least, looked like a leap to me. I had fun my first few times through X7, and I'd even show you my original save file with all my characters maxed out via the parts system, if my PS2's disk drive still worked. Damn things are way too unreliable. Thankfully, I have Mega Man X Legacy Collection 2 on the Switch. The two Legacy Collections respectively feature X1 through X4 and X5 to X8 on them, which is to say, the first collection has the games you'd actually want to play, and the second one is just for fans. Well, okay, I actually like X5 and X8, but they're definitely not as good as some of those earlier games. X7 and X8 were also both PS2 games, and they run fantastically here on the Switch. I just feel like I need to point that out. As crisp and input lag seeming free as X7 is here though, being on the Legacy Collection doesn't solve one of its biggest flaws: the controls. Unlike the prior 2D Mega Man games, Mega Man X7 is split into both 2D and 3D sections. But I'd argue those are perhaps misleading labels, and that the game is instead split up into 3 different types of sections: 2.5D, Fixed 3D, and Open 3D. All 3 sections share a similar aesthetic and involve you taking control of 3 different characters as you shoot and slash your way through different platforming challenges. Well, technically it's 2 playable characters at once, but we'll get to that. In the 2.5D sections, you move along a 2D plane in a manner similar to the previous games. Like in X5 and X6, you can crouch in these sections to avoid enemies, and you can dash, jump, shoot, or slash if you're Zero, and you even have an air dash move from the start, which is nice. It's also the fastest and snappiest feeling of these sections, which only seems like a compliment until you realize the gameplay still feels slow and perhaps even a little sluggish compared to the games on the PlayStation 1 and SNES. That said, I call these sections 2.5D and not just 2D, not due to the polygonal nature of the graphics, but rather because even though your movement is limited to a 2D plane, enemy movement is not. Granted, in the case of X and newcomer Axel, your shots can home onto enemies, which makes this a non-issue, even if it also removes an element of challenge found in the previous games. The second of these section types is also by far the most annoying: the fixed 3D sections. As the name implies, you move around in a 3D environment with a fixed camera angle. Most of the time, these fixed angles are just awful. They can be awkward and make it hard to gauge depth or how close an enemy is to the screen. That doesn't mean the open 3D sections are much better though. Full camera control seems like it'd make it easier to see around areas, but how you move the camera around is all sorts of ass backwards. So no matter what mode you're in, the left joystick moves you around and the right joystick just switches between your special weapons. To move the camera in the open 3D sections, you just pan around using the left and right shoulder buttons. What the hell? Why? And like you can remap every button in the game via the menu, but not the right analog stick. This is even more baffling because not only was using the right thumbstick for camera movement a standard in games in 2003, but in every previous X game, you use those left and right shoulder buttons for weapon switching. This is a control setup that's terrible for newcomers and series veterans alike. However, this is probably only the second most baffling decision made in X7. The first is the treatment of Mega Man X himself. Before we get a little ahead of ourselves a la DJ Slope, allow me to briefly summarize the plot of X7 here. Sometime after the events of what I'm assuming is X's good ending from X6, the world is thriving and looking a little bit Blade Runner-y. However, attacks from Mavericks, Reploid robots that have become evil, are still rampant. Along with the traditional Maverick Hunter group, consisting of series mains X and Zero, a new group has arisen to combat crime called Red Alert. Led by a guy named, well, Red, their secret weapon is a young vigilante Reploid named Axel. Axel is special because he's the prototype of a new generation of Reploid, one that can copy the DNA data of other Reploids to temporarily shapeshift and mimic them. Trust me, it sounds really cool in story and is used pretty well in cutscenes, but you need to land a final hit on an enemy using a dinky little special pea shooter shot as Axel in gameplay, which is kind of disappointing. I think I used this a grand total of twice in the actual game. And before anyone asks in the comments, no, it isn't much better in X8 either. Back to the story, Red Alert starts using more and more dangerous methods to take down Mavericks, some of which put civilians in danger. This concerns Axel, and makes him decide to defect. Red gets pissed off by this though, and sends Red Alert after him. Axel is chased through the intro stage from X1, where he meets up with Zero, who's then also chased. After an easy intro boss, Zero takes Axel back to Maverick Hunter HQ, where Red issues them a challenge. He will release 8 Mavericks that Red Alert has in captivity, and if the Maverick Hunters can defeat them all, they can keep Axel. But if they fail, I don't know, I guess Axel gets killed? Except, Red isn't actually evil and is instead being manipulated by Sigma, who is unable to be in the forefront of this story until the very end, because he's trying to kick a nasty smoking habit.
That's right, folks. I'll do it again and again. I will make X and Zero mine.
Anyways, who could have seen this coming? Sigma being the one pulling the strings was only the twist in not only 4 of the 6 past games, but also in the 2 Game Boy games. Wow! You may be asking, where's Mega Man X himself? After all, this is Mega Man X7. Well, instead of being a beacon of justice who fights to make the world a better place, X7's plot makes X demote himself to Couch Bitch. You don't even get to play as him for most of your first run. Instead, during cutscenes, you just get to listen to X go on and on, complaining about how he doesn't want to fight, and how fighting won't solve anything and whatever. And you literally have to unlock the ability to play as him. You have to unlock the ability to play as Mega Man X and Mega Man X7. It's freaking just, it's shitty. And when you finally do unlock him, he's basically just a better Axel. By the way, you do this either by rescuing 64 Reploids throughout the stages, which also allows you to get parts upgrades to make your character stronger, or just make it to the final fortress. Gameplay wise, Axel is an X who has a dinky copy shot instead of a charged buster shot, no Dr. Light armor capsules, and is also a bit more agile. Zero, on the other hand, is a close-ranged fighter, as always, though he seems to be a bit neutered here. Like in Mega Man Extreme 2, his Z-Saber slashes don't seem like they reach as far, are as fast, or deal as much damage as they did in the PS1 games. Honestly, once I unlocked X, I pretty much exclusively played as a team of X and Axel. Indeed, for the second playthrough and onwards I did for this video, I did New Game Plus runs, which allow you to keep all your Reploid upgrades, heart tanks, sub-tanks, armor pieces, and even has X unlocked from the beginning. And for those runs, I don't think I touched Zero at all outside of the intro stage. Going back, you may have heard me mention teams. One of the coolest ideas X7 has is the team mechanic. You pick 2 characters before starting each stage, can swap between them at any time by using the R2 button. Each character has their own life bar too, though if one dies you lose a life instead of immediately swapping to the still alive character. On one hand, I think it's cool how this system makes you have to manage upgrades and life bar restoring heart tanks since those are split between characters, as it adds a small element of strategy to how you have to tackle the game. On the other hand, it's kind of lame that there's no team attack or anything here that really shows off the real superpower of teamwork or whatever. Funny enough, both that and the death thing were also fixed in X8. Can y'all tell I really like Mega Man X8 yet? Back to X7. Once you unlock X, you also get the ability to go back throughout the stages to get 4 armor pieces. Yep, there's only one armor set here, that being the glide armor, compared to the 2 different sets that you could find throughout X5, X6, and X8. That said, unlike in X5 and X6, you get to use armor parts as soon as you find them instead of having to wait to complete the armor set, just like in the original games. The glide armor itself is super great too. Reduced damage, enemy health drops get sucked into you like you're a big energy magnet, and even the ability to literally glide through the air. This actually kind of breaks some stages. Take the Section Flame Highenard stage. Usually you have to awkwardly fight huge enemies on these platforms suspended over instant death lava, but if you bring Glide Armor X with you to this part of the stage, and if you just move the camera slightly to the left, you can glide across a gap at the very start of this section to basically skip 95% of this area. Even if you did have to go through this section on its own though and you ended up dying a lot, death is just a slap on the wrist here. If you get a game over, you just start back at the last load screen. The downside is though, that there are a ton of load screens throughout each stage, and they were annoyingly long in the PS2 version as well. Sure, they're way shorter on the Legacy Collection, but come on! This is the same system that gave us games like Final Fantasy XII. You want me to believe that we need dedicated load screens for, at times, 30-second sections of platforming? Nah, this is just poor design. Some of these stages are just plain boring, too. There's a lot of straight lines of enemies here or there and no real actual challenge. You can brute force your way through a lot of stuff here, and I can only think of 3 truly annoying platforming sections. The first is in Wind Crow Rank stage, where you have to hop from airplane to airplane. This should be easy enough, but sometimes your character's drop shadow just decides to not exist. This makes it a pain in the ass. Also, every time you die here, you have to watch the same several second long cutscene of your character flying in and just standing there before hopping off onto another plane. Like, was this really necessary? Doesn't help either that some of the planes randomly speed up or slow down when you jump onto them too. Another part that features piss poor platforming is in Snipe Anteater stage, which is filled with these platforms that will reverse gravity. And it's odd, as I usually love gravity switching in platformers. I think Mario Galaxy is awesome, that Gravity Man stage in Mega Man 5 is way fun. But this just gives me a headache. Also, side note, is anyone else irked that they spelled the word anteater wrong? The final annoying section I want to mention is the first of the 2 Sigma stages. It's actually not that difficult of a stage, just there's a few spots that are definite beginner's traps because of the camera angle. You can think you're in the clear, only to find yourself in an inescapable bottomless pit. Granted, these aren't the only annoying parts of the game, just the only annoying parts I can think of that specifically involve platforming. The boss fight against Red, though, involves you being suspended above a bottomless pit on platforms that also have somewhat wonky hit detection. And also, it just goes on forever. In that sense, it reminds me of Gates' boss fight from X6, though thankfully it isn't nearly that boring. Honestly, if you're playing through X7 on the Legacy Collection, I won't blame you if you just switched to Rookie Hunter mode here. By the way, that doesn't just make this thing go by faster, but it halves the amount of damage you take and doubles the damage you deal until you turn it off. It really makes fights like this one in Gates and X6 go by so much faster. And I do need to stress, in both the case of Red and Gate, I don't think they're particularly hard fights, just really long and boring ones. Something not even Rookie Hunter mode could make better is Ride Borski stage. This is a ride bike stage, and it's on a racetrack too. Are you ready for some high-speed hijinks? Well, too bad. This stage involves you very slowly driving around your glorified shopping cart as you try to defuse bombs. And yeah, you have more than enough time to do so, and you defuse them just by running over them. But just look at this. It's so damn slow. Do you think anyone on the dev team actually thought this was fun? Not to mention, most of the Maverick boss fights are pretty unmemorable too. And they can drag. On my first run, my initial fight with Vanishing Gungaroo took over 7 minutes. And you can take a ride armor into this boss fight too, but that hardly speeds it up at all because he also has a ride armor. By the way, there are 2 varieties of ride armor in this game, and both are stiff and kind of jank to control. Here's some other bosses that suck too. Snipe Anteater sends out these homing bastards that I don't think you can actually destroy. The first form of the final fight against Sigma can be defeated mostly by just standing on one block and shooting with Wind Crowrang's weapon. The camera during Splash Warfly's boss fight often just doesn't want to cooperate. And the final form of Sigma himself really does seem difficult at first, mostly because of jank camera angles and the floating platforms in this fight being suspended over a bottomless pit. But then you realize his ass can be beat down using bubbles, and it becomes way easier. The easiest boss to beat, and the one I always start with, is Soldier Stone Kong. So if you gotta play X7, start with him. I just find it funny how he tries to be all stoic and full of deep commentary on the world here too. Just listen to him in his pre-fight cutscene.
We have already strayed from the path. Now, all we can do is stay true to our beliefs, wherever they might lead us.
Dude, you're in the freaking shooty McSlashy / action game. We get it. Apes together strong. There's one boss, though, that just pisses me off to no end. Flame Hynard. I'd imagine that even if you haven't played X7, you may know who this guy is. This is the voice behind the infamous burn to the ground meme. And fun fact, the first time I went up against this guy as a kid, my mom had to come into the room and ask me to mute the living room TV because it was giving her a headache. I think both of us were thankful for the ensuing silence once I muted the TV. It's kind of a shame how annoying and repetitive Hynard's voice lines are too, because the X7 boss music rocks. I mean, the whole OST is really solid. Not one of my favorites, I take X1, X4, or X6 over it any day, but this is at least one part of the game that lives up to the legacy of the earlier titles. Anyways, back to our angry convicted arsonist here. Heinard makes multiple clones of himself, with the real Heinard being on top of this big robotic goat? Horse? I'm not sure. You gotta make it out of the main arena and hope you don't glitch through this big donkey's legs as you climb up it, and from there, you gotta do your damnedest to keep Heinard under Robo Henny's head. He's easy to hit there and will just shoot these missiles at you that you can dodge with a bit of practice. If he ever leaves ahead and goes down his Robo-Seed's back though, you may as well just jump off into the instant death lava below and restart the fight. See, if he gets onto the back, he'll make 2 more clones of himself that run around in a circle along with the real Heinard, and they're just a pain in the ass to destroy. And if you try to run from them to get back onto the head, they'll dogpile onto you. And I don't think you can escape from them. The only surefire way to beat this guy semi-easily is to save him for last and make sure you can bring X into the stage. Even if you don't have the armor capsules collected, X's X-Buster is way better than any of the special weapons in the game. Which, granted, I really didn't care much for anyways, save for this laser beam that Axel gets. Especially when he's fully upgraded, X can just tear through enemies and bosses. Maybe that's why I came back to this one so much when I first got it. The upgrade system here is way simple and easy to understand compared to the previous game. Even if your navigator Alia here feels obliged to explain it every single time you go to upgrade a character. Like, we get it, Alia! Shut up and go back to preparing to be actually playable in X8! With full upgrades on a team of X and Axel and the glide armor in tow, X7 is actually a pretty easy romp. Granted, a lot of stages are rather bland and not really memorable. Like, look at Tornado Tanyan stage here. It's just a straight line with a mini-boss. Gungaroo stage is also a basic enemy gauntlet with some right armor sections thrown in, but what I'm getting at is there's a lot of blandness. I guess the first part of Flame Heinard stage is pretty good though. This, the 2D sections in the intro stage, and the 2D portions of the final Sigma stages are the only parts of the game that truly feel like Mega Man X to me. But even then, they aren't particularly memorable. At a quick glance, I'm pretty certain I could mix up screenshots from Flame Heinard stage as a shot of Flame Mammoth stage from Maverick Hunter X. It'd have to be a pretty low quality screenshot, but you get the point. Maverick Hunter X and X8 also feel like they had a lot more production value. Cutscenes in the X7 have a case of the Pokemon Sword and Shields. That's to say, character mouths don't move, models often just flip around in place instead of actually moving, and a lot of them just use static images. This is what you'd expect in a DS or GBA game, not a full-price PS2 release. It doesn't help that the voice acting sucks too. I don't mind Axel or Red's voices, but damn do I prefer Axel's X8 voice. Characters like Cygnus and Zero seem bored, and some bosses, such as Tornado Tanyan and Flame Heinard, are so unintentionally cheesy sounding that I wouldn't blame you for thinking you were playing a game from the mid-90s. The absolute worst performance here though is X. He's just so horribly whiny.
No way! Don't you get it? He must not be rewarded for such methods.
And nothing against the voice actors here or anything, especially X's actor, but the Ocean Group, the studio behind the voices in X8, Command Mission, and Maverick Hunter, really put X7's cast to shame. This isn't the X you know and love in X7. This is just some interpretation of X from some angsty teens fanfic. But what really makes X7 the worst X game in my opinion is just how unmemorable it is. Mega Man X7 is a bad game for mostly different reasons than X6, as I said. At its core, Mega Man X6 is built off the game engine from X4 and X5. It is a fundamentally functional game with fun gameplay at its heart. It just happens to fail on many levels due to poorly implemented new systems, a convoluted plot, and annoying stage designs and fortress bosses. X7 tries a lot new though, and that should be commended. At least they tried. It was also done by a completely different team from the Mega Man Legends games, which by the way were 100% in 3D back on the PS1, but I do think X7 was an honest attempt to try to bring the X series to a then modern era. But it's just missing something. I don't know if it needed more time to cook or if the team behind it was feeling particularly uninspired, especially as Inafune was mostly uninvolved and focused on the Zero series at this point. It has the heart of a great platforming series, sure, but perhaps not the soul. I remember back when I looked at the Mega Man DOS games, I called Mega Man 3 for DOS the worst game I'd ever played because it nearly bored me to sleep. And I still stand by both that verdict and that criteria for defining the term bad. Games like Sonic 06, Superman 64, and even Mega Man X6 are bad games, yes, but in a weird way they're also fun to play, even if a lot of that fun comes from abusing glitches and playing while mildly inebriated with friends. X7, both technically speaking and in terms of fun factor, is a better game than both the DOS games, but it has so much less to offer than literally any other X game. You're better off watching in-depth analyses of why X7 is a bad game than actually playing the game itself. And by the way, if you enjoyed this vid, I'd absolutely recommend taking a look at the X7 deep dives from the likes of Jay's Reviews, Quickies Don't Cut It, and Some Call Me Johnny. But you'd really not get anything by playing X7 itself. If you already own Legacy Collection 2, then sure, hop in and maybe try it. But nobody really needs to play this game. To me, it's the worst of the X games not because it fails the most on a technical level. Rather, it's the worst because it's the blandest. It's funny, I can absolutely describe X7 with just one word. Meh. But on that note, that's it for part 3 of Mega May 2021. I hope you enjoyed this video, or that at least made you think about what games you find to be the most or least memorable in general. I'm curious to know your thoughts down in the comments. What is the most boring game you have ever played? I'd also like to send a big thank you to my Patreon patrons, YouTube channel members, and paid Twitch subs, whose names you're seeing scrolling up the screen right now. I also need to give a big shout out to Jay's Reviews and my friend Jazzy for helping me get some of my thoughts together for this video and a recent episode of the Speedrun podcast we recorded. So on that note, thank you very much for watching, stay classy, and I'll see you next time.